This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 757, and this week we welcome Derrick A of Clark Seif Clark. We're going to talk about some current events such as wildfire characterization and remediation, talk a little bit about mental health issues in professionals, and much more. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc. at emsl.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go down to John Lapotiere, Indoor Air Quality Solutions in Sanford, Florida, who was first to identify 2,000 gallons per day as the amount of air drawn in by an adult daily. Here's today's IAQ Radio trivia question. What was the confidential code name assigned to preparations for the D-Day invasion? Back to you, Joe.
All right. Derrick Denis is the Senior Vice President with Clark Seif Clark. He's a practitioner, inventor, educator, author, and volunteer who's been providing industrial hygiene, environmental health and safety, infection control, and IEQ services for over 32 years. He's also an expert witness for insurance and litigation disputes for both plaintiffs and defendants, and he's an inventor of and patent holder for sewer gas solutions. Welcome back, Derrick. It's been too long.
It has been too long. Look at this. Behold the power of graybeards. Unbelievable.
I prefer silver fox myself, but that's all right. I'll take graybeard. So how have you been, buddy? Long time no see.
All things have been good. I mean, my health is good. My family is good. I try to be as positive as possible. Every day can't be unicorns and rainbows, but I have nothing to complain about, my friend.
So when you start the day, what's your goal every day when you get up to go to work?
Well, Joe, you may have heard me say this before. I have what I term hero complex. And so every day when I wake up, my goal is literally to prevent other people from dying early. Now, I can't prevent people from dying specifically, but if I can prevent them from dying early, that's what jazzes me up. That's what gets me motivated, and I think this industry has lots of opportunities to do that. So it has been a long and interesting journey, and I hope that I've prevented lots of people from dying early. We'll see in the end, but that's my hope. That's what motivates me. That's why I do this work.
We've been talking a lot about wildfires and fire damage, not just wildfires, but all types of fires. From your experience, you've done a lot of different things in the industry: infection control, indoor environmental quality, mold inspection and remediation type stuff. Which between like a mold and an IEQ investigator and someone that's doing structural damage assessment, let's just stay with mold. Which is more difficult in your opinion, after a fire, going in and inspecting, or a wildfire, or looking for mold?
Well, I'd put it to you this way. It's all about timing. Clark Seif Clark and myself, we've been at the tip of the spear on things like mold. I remember sitting down with Franco Seif, owner of Clark Seif Clark, in about 1999, 2000, and talking about, hey, people are asking for mold inspections. What are we going to do? Well, at that time, there were no guidelines. There were no standards. There was, what do you think you need to do? So we did, as we do, the research on what was available. At the time, the only thing that was out was the Red Book, right? The bioaerosols book, 1999. That was pretty much the only reference. Actually, that might not be true. I think there might have been something that came out. I forget when the New York City guideline came out, but
Yep.
the question was, what are we going to look for? What question does our client need us to answer, and how best can we leverage science, technology, investigative skills to answer that question? So, if you were to ask me what's harder, mold or fire, at this point, I would say fire, especially wildfire related, because it's right now we're at the tip of the spear. When it comes to mold, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of guidelines. You may agree with them or not agree with them, but there's pretty much a cookie cutter template out there that you can personalize for your investigation. When it comes to wildfire assessment, again, we've been at the tip of the spear for a long time. But I think it's harder. When in 2002, I got a call from a public adjuster, and they said, "Hey, can you guys check 30 buildings that were maybe impacted by this rodeo Chittiski fire or Chittiski? Depends who you talk to, right? Is it rodeo or rodeo, right?" But so I said, "Okay, well let me look." And at the time,
Where is this at?
everyone. Oh, it's in Arizona. It's in the
Arizona.
mountains of Arizona. It's in the mountains of Arizona. So Ponderosa Pine Forest.
All right.
And so I, met with my colleagues. We started looking around, talking to the labs, and basically this is what we found out. Here's how you do it. You take your hand, you wipe a surface. If it's black, it's impacted. You take a chem sponge, you wipe a surface. If it's black, it's impacted. Well, I said, well, that's not going to be the empirical data I think my client's looking for. So we started looking at the university research, and we found that soot, which is high carbon, basically microscopic charcoal, is about 3% of wildfires. And we felt like the labs had enough confidence that they would identify soot with direct microscopy. They would look under a microscope and be able to see that. And it's inexpensive. And so I told the client, look, we're going to go do the most important thing, which is the visual assessment, but we'll also collect some samples for soot. So we go to these buildings, and I'm an Eagle Scout. I've seen lots of campfires. I'm sure you guys have barbecued before. You don't need to be an expert to know what a fire pit and the debris related to a fire looks like. And these buildings had three-dimensional fire debris, right? So you'd pick up a soda can, and there would be a ring, a half-inch deep of clean space, and all around it was this goo. So we took our pictures, we looked at the penetrations, where would this come in, how far did it travel visually, and then we collected our samples, sent them to the lab. About half of those came back none detect for soot. So we wrote a report, like we should, in our opinion, visually clean the building, samples none detect. Well, that client got brought up in insurance fraud charges. Ultimately countersued. The insurance company won a pretty sizable settlement. We had to defend ourselves in court. And I had to basically tell the jury, look, this is science. This is experimentation. I think that soot should be looked for because it showed up in half the samples, but I don't think soot alone is enough. And that's what started Clark Seif Clark down that pioneering path of determining what other things should we look for, how should we look for them, how should we collect them. So now you heard people say soot, ash, and char is what you should look for. I'm pretty certain that comes directly from us, and that's okay. That's what science is about. We're sharing. We learn, share, repeat, and suddenly the world is a better place. That's my motto: learn, share, repeat, and suddenly the world is a better place. So. So now we moved on to direct microscopic examination and TEM, SEM, EDX, the advanced microscopy, essentially. In some cases, we're looking for pH even, but that's sort of the gold standard for wildfire urban interface, in my opinion. And how you collect the samples depends on the analysis you want. Some people are doing tape lifts. We like wipes and microvacs. But what you'll find is, it depends on the fire. Wildland-urban-interface fire, WUI, is the term. Not all of the wildland fires are actually wildland-urban interface fires. For example, you guys have heard of the Eaton and the Palisades fires in Southern California recently. So I got in my RV when those things cooked off and drove straight to Altadena, parked in the middle of hell, and watched hundreds of fire trucks and hundreds of Humvees and hundreds of line repair trucks drive by. The air quality was terrible, but 16,280 buildings burned in those two fires. That's not a wildland fire. That's not a wildland-urban-interface fire. That's an urban fire.
Yeah.
And so we actually changed our approach, as we do as scientists, to match the needs at hand.
Interesting. Cliff, let me get you to jump in here.
Okay. What's the difference between the term impact and damage?
Great question. We talk to people and they talk about smoke damage. That's, for example, since we're talking about fires. In my professional opinion, damage is the altering of something so that it has to be either repaired or modified in some way to bring it back to a pre-event condition. Impacted, in the case of wildfire, may mean, hey, look, there's when you spill food on the floor is impacted with food. You clean the floor. So a lot of these situations we deal with, the buildings aren't damaged, but they're impacted. They need to be addressed, cleaned. An asbestos release, for example, would not be damage to the floor, but you would clean the floor, for example. So I think it's important that a lot of people use the term the building is damaged, and it's actually not altered. And so I don't like that term. I'm not telling people what to say. I hate when people tell me what to say, for sure. But I like the term impacted because I think it better represents what you're up against when it comes to things like condition 2 with mold. That is the material damaged, or are you just going to clean? Is it cleanable? Now the question always comes up: is it cleanable? How can you prove it? Can I throw it away? You can always throw things away, even if they are cleanable. But if they're impacted, they're usually able to be cleaned.
From a restoration standpoint, okay, I think that we look at it a little bit differently. And how we look at it is the presence of an undesirable substance constitutes a damaged condition. Okay, and I think that that's going to apply with asbestos. I think that's going to apply, with mold, and I think it applies with fire damage, as well, when there is a visible residue. And I do agree that removing the residue is necessary. And I also agree that once the residue has been satisfactorily removed, it's no longer in that damaged condition. But traditionally, that's kind of how the restoration industries looked at it. And that kind of goes back to Marty King, because, he would say, the presence of smoke residue constitutes a damaged condition. So in any event, that's kind of what we've been doing for. I think they're pretty parallel. Go ahead.
Yeah, if a water event occurs and you have water on a floor, let's say it's a vinyl floor standing, I don't know if the vinyl floor is damaged. The drywall or let's say the cabinet gets impacted by that water and suddenly that cabinet swells. So then I would categorize that as the cabinet is not only is it impacted, it is damaged because the swelling occurs. It's not going to retract. And so it requires, it's a change in the condition. But whatever term you use,
Understood.
I think the bigger question that we're being asked is it cleanable or is it not cleanable? Is it restorable or not restorable? And I think there's a lot of controversy about that. But controversy is what we do. We inject ourselves into chaos. So we are stepping,
Well, if you've got an area that's overwhelmingly definitely been impacted by wildfire, is microscopy needed to confirm that?
Well, our primary mission, our goal is to visually identify the things that are visually identifiable. So if you've got, again, a half an inch of fire debris, whether it's soot, ash, char, or something else inside a building, and it wasn't there before the fire, do you need to sample that? What is the goal? I think everybody who does sampling really needs to take a step back and look at the why. It's important for me to know the why before I start doing anything. Because if the question is there fire debris in my building? Sampling may not be necessary. As you said, if the whole building is black in a structure fire, or if there's, three-dimensional material, the building, there's a response warranted, right? There's a response warranted. Now, if you're trying to ask a different question, like, are there heavy metals? Or if you go to a place where there's no visible evidence, and that's where the sampling really is, has an advantage. In most environmental, I have a degree in environmental science. They call it step-out sampling. You have ground zero, or your area of your spill, and then you step out from that a certain distance and you sample again, and you step out from that and you keep moving away in concentric circles until you have no impact. With a wildfire, it's a little different. Ground zero is outside. So we do it basically the opposite. Instead of step out sampling, and I don't know if I coined this phrase, but I feel like we did, is step in sampling. Ground zero is outside, you do the penetration points, and you work your way to the interior to see how far that impact, if at all, occurred indoors. And the sampling can help you determine that when there's no visible evidence.
I want to go back to where there is visible evidence, okay? Because there was a big argument when we were putting together the IAQ S700 wildfire standard, in that what the argument was over the word confirmation. Can we confirm that there was fire residue there? And to me, it was the duck test. If it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck and it smells like a duck, it's a duck. I think the difference between structural fires is oftentimes there's overwhelming evidence. And when there's overwhelming evidence, I believe we can confirm it. This wasn't here yesterday. It's here today. Oftentimes you have occupant testimony about what happened and so on and so forth. So I think it's absolutely ridiculous to say that we can't confirm something that you really, the evidence is overwhelming. And I think you're right on wildfires. I think that's where you do need to sample, particularly when you can't see anything. To me, it would be logical. And for some reason, a lot of people don't think that that's a logical approach. They're just afraid of using the word confirm. And I don't know, I'm not afraid to use it when it's applicable.
Well, I think they're afraid to say that they're qualified to visually assess. I mean, when you see visible mold growth, I think most Americans, if they see mold growing on bread or cheese, they're not going to say, I'm going to test that to see if it's mold before I eat it. They're going to say, hey, that looks like moldy bread. It's to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that's moldy bread. All the evidence indicates it's moldy bread. You could sample it to confirm it if you felt like somebody was going to question you later, but you could also take a picture or pictures. I mean, these devices, this is amazing. These cell phones, right? I mean, you can take very good, high quality photos, high quality video, and that is evidence. Maybe that's the evidence you need. Maybe they just want to take your word for it. I want you to believe, if I tell you, Cliff, your house needs to be burned to the ground, I don't want people to question. I just want you to reach in your pocket, pull out a match. Conversely, if I tell you, hey, Cliff, you don't need to do anything, I want you to feel like we've looked at all of the options, we've looked at all of the factors, and your home is not, it's not impacted. But I have years of experience and credibility, but what if I was in this business for 2 years? Maybe I do need to rely on sampling. So I'm not knocking sampling, even when there's overwhelming visual evidence. And there's a middle ground that a lot of people don't talk about. If I go to a project and I see three-dimensional schmutz or even visible mold growth, I might take a tape lift. I might scoop up some of that visual schmutz and put it in a bag, because I don't want to drive 3.5 hours to go have to do it later. So I pick it up, I put it in a bag, and then I hold it in the file for 90 days. And if I think there's going to be a controversy, then I can submit it. And if there's no controversy, then I've saved my client resources. I mean, Franco tells a story about the poopy diaper that falls on the ground, and his wife runs out of the room, and they call a hygienist to test it for fecal coliforms. And, and it's this whole, you'll have to ask him next time you see him. It's a fun little story. But the point is, the diaper's full of crap.
Right.
Pick it up, address it. You don't need to test it.
Let me ask you a question here, Derrick. Now, You talked about doing like step in evaluation of things. If I've got a wildfire and there is and you've confirmed that that the indoor environment has been impacted, so interior rooms, etc. What do you do about the building enclosure?
Good question. So one is the attic will have penetration points. So the way that smoke's going to come into the building is through holes, gaps, penetration points. So we break the house up into, we take a sample of the exterior, we take a sample of at the penetration point. So windows, doors, the attic eaves, all those locations are places where smoke's going to come in. It's going to lose, that air is going to lose all of its energy, and it's going to predominantly dump its load right there. So we break this house up into functional spaces, if you will. So the outdoors, penetration points, the attic, those are the primary places you're going to find wildfire smoke, right? I don't think you have to be a genius or an expert to know that. And then as we step in, the reason we do it that way is a lot of times the only places affected are the penetration points. And then we can give our client a reasonable scope of repair, which is clean within 3 to 5 feet of every door and window, right? But you don't need to clean the entire house, if you will. In some cases, you do. We check the HVAC system separately. We check the clothing or the porous contents separately. We check the interior structure separately. Now, we choose to do composite sampling as well, but to stay with your question, penetration points are the places where smoke comes in. So, how many penetrations are on the outside of your house that are significant? Well, it's the windows and doors. Now, some people would argue, well, what about that hose bib? Well, we've taken walls apart and we're not finding in a structure fire. This is the important difference, I think, Joe. A structure fire creates a lot of heat and pressurizes the house. So air is pushing into every nook, cranny, crevice. Wildfires are not like that, right? Wildfires are not do not do the same. That's not the same thing. And so what we've done testing. When you open up walls, you look in the wall cavity, we're not finding detectable schmutz in wall cavities in most cases. Now, there are a couple of examples where if the house next to you burned and your house burned, I mean, or your house didn't burn, excuse me, you could melt the foam inside of the stucco system just from heat. So there's always a reason to look at the whole picture. Every job is unique. That's the other key concept. If you cookie cutter everything, you're going to miss something. So you need to look at what are the facts for that site? What questions am I trying to answer at that site? And then develop your investigative plan to answer those questions.
One of the things that you said was that it's not rocket science in order to take the samples, and I think that's another area of controversy, is who is actually qualified to take a sample. Particularly if you're in a rural area and there aren't any industrial hygienists, and there may not even be a restoration company there. It's just
Right.
if it would seem to me that, and you may disagree, but a lot of the laboratories provide not only the instructions in terms of step by step how to do it, they also send you the materials with which to do it, in the
Right.
mail in a little care package, along with the gloves and everything. So,
Well, I think the key is it's not about the sampling. I could teach a monkey to take a spore trap. I could teach a monkey to take a PCM sample. I could teach a monkey to collect a wipe sample. That's not where I mean, you need some level of training, but it's this much training. The question is why that sample? Why that analytical method? Why that lab? Why that location? And then what do the results mean? That's the difference in the expertise. But to your point, Cliff, I think anybody could do the sampling. But who is interpreting, who is guiding that sampling,
right.
who is making those decisions? Now, in industrial hygiene or IEPs or environmental consulting, or you pick your, every industry has 27 words for
Right.
everything. You have to you have to consider that normally we go out as an individual, It's not like not like I go to a site to assess it and I have three assistants and I can direct them. I want you to sample there. I need you to photograph that. Normally it's a one-man show. And so if you send a junior person out on the one-man show, you may be missing some of the boat, right? So to your
Okay.
point, that's where the training is important. But if it's just, hey, I need you to sample here, here, and here, a monkey could go do that. But interpretation, why those locations, why that sample method, even why that turnaround. I mean, most of your technicians, they're not involved in the contractual obligation piece of the puzzle. So they may not even know, is this a 1 day turn or a 2 week turn? And why? So I hope that answers the question.
Well, I think going back to what you said, yeah, I agree with you, and I think particularly in the cases of structural fires, until you've seen fire residues inside, pressurized residues inside of walls, you don't necessarily know that they're there. And I think that what's happened is over the course of 50 some years that I've been in the business, I've made a lot of mistakes and I've learned from them. And so I kind of learned where to look. You fool me once, it's on me. Fool me twice, it's on you. So the bottom line is, and I think that's why experience is so important in really structural damage assessment. I mean, you really need to have, I think you need to know how to clean a fire. And if you've never cleaned one, you can't just write a protocol. And I think in mold you could do it. In mold, I think there was a whole lot of cookie cuttering going on, and I think I think it's okay. And my big issue with a lot of what happened in mold was subordination, I think, of restorers to people that knew less about the industry of cleaning and remediation than the remediators did. We create this IEP credential or designation or whatever, and there's really not necessarily a credential for it. But I think that's really where you kind of draw the line. And I think that you pointed it out. I like the analogy of if you use a cookie cutter, you're going to forget things. And I just looked at so many mold remediation protocols that I reviewed or was asked to complete and so on and so forth. It was funny how much likeness there was between them. Exactly. It was just a
Right.
whole lot of that, and
Well, the process of doing an investigation is the same. If you've done asbestos work, you have a foundation for mold related work. If you've done mold related work, you have a foundation for doing fentanyl cleanup, for example. But that doesn't make you an expert. You just have some foundation. So we obviously need to teach the foundation of PPE, for example. What are the four things you need to wear a respirator, right? You need a respiratory protection program, medical eligibility, annual training, and annual fit testing. Whether you're doing mold work, lead work, fentanyl work, anthrax, whatever, that's foundational. That's the same everywhere. We really need to push the foundation because, again, I just switched gears, but one of the people I'm trying to prevent from dying early is the poor schmo, because I was that schmo who is scraping the fireproofing off the deck. Right? I was that schmo. I taped the scrapers to my hand in a PAPR and I scraped for hours and hours and hours. And I thought, we've chosen to do hazardous work. And we need to make sure we're not dying as a result or not dying or not dying as a result. Right. So that's part of it too. The expertise is important, but someone could say, well, how hard is it to, I put a scraper in your hand and say, scrape that. And you scrape it, there's really no training involved. The expertise comes in the how do you not get it in you or on you? How do you not bring it to other places? How do you package it so you can move it to a waste disposal facility? So there's always, I think in this industry, what fascinates me is that I am always learning. Okay, you've been doing this for 50 years. I thought you were only 50, Cliff. Jeez Louise. But I'm always learning. I'm always learning. Even when I think I've got it dialed in, there's a nuance, there's a detail. Joe may say something. I'm like, holy smokes, I never thought of that, or that's a great point. So that's what makes me jazzed about this industry is one, we're helping people, and two, you're never bored. Even if you just did asbestos inspections every day, there's always something to learn. I'm surprised how many people don't have the foundation, for example, in air conditioning. Somebody will do a survey of any kind and they'll say, the metal air conditioning thing over there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a register or a diffuser. That's a grill. Is it a split system, a mini split system, a rooftop package unit? Is a water source heat pump? That foundation takes a long time to learn. And I've been blessed that I've worked in virtually every kind of building you can think of, from nuclear hot cells to prisons to schools to residential structures. So that's what jazzes me, is always learning. But just because it jazzes me doesn't mean that's what other people are doing. I think it's important that we're getting old, guys. Again, it's Team Graybeard over here, right? We need to pass that knowledge, and we need to put in place the mechanisms so others can keep building. Because hey, look, I'm not a smart guy. I am building off the foundation of some other smart guy who built off the foundation of some other smart guy, right? Go down to Paracelsus or whatever. So we need to make sure that our foundation is good so somebody can stand on our shoulders and take it another level, and someone can stand on their shoulders and get even better. Yeah.
I got to stop here and thank our sponsors. When we come back, there's a good text question that came in, and then I want to kind of do a little more on fire, and then move on to a couple other topics. So we'll be back in just a minute with our guest, Derrick A of Clark Seif Clark. Our association sponsors are the Environmental Information Association. EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. Tramex Meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc., providing high-quality, full-service laboratory services since 1981. EMSL.com. All right, we're back with Derrick. Derrick, I want to ask a question that got texted in. Everyone addresses when sampling for char, soot, ash, identifying the ID and the extent. What about after remediation? How does the owner know the work is completed accurately? Is it visual? Is there resampling? Are there wipes? And I want to mention something that maybe you could bring this in because it's a note I got from our emails. Detectable is not synonymous with dangerous. So after a fire, if I'm still detecting something, does that mean I've got to continue cleaning?
All right. Well, we'll start with the detectable dangerous. So I'm drinking a soda here, and if I send this to the lab, and this is not a product placement, I'm not being paid by Coca-Cola. There's detectable lead in that soda. Here's how I'll say it, Joe. From the moment that we're born, everything is trying to kill us. Ultraviolet light, radon, mold spores, bacteria, viruses, apex predators, other people. It's amazing. Cliff has lived his full 53. You said 53 years you've been around? Just teasing. But yeah, it's amazing any of us are alive at all with all these insults that we are, quote unquote, being exposed to all the time. So couple that we're always exposed to something with the laboratory technology, and the metering technology is getting better and better and better. And now we're detecting things not in the parts per million, not in the parts per billion, but we're detecting things in the parts per trillion range in some cases. At some point, detectable does not equal dangerous. And this is a really hard thing to talk to. I actually had a woman yell at me, "You don't care about my unborn child." She cursed at me and said, "You're trying to kill my baby." And I said, "Ma'am, I'm just telling you that these levels are considered by all government agencies to be well below what is safe, what is accepted. It is not zero." And I will tell you, here's a great example. Okay, I'm from Oklahoma. I went to college at Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma, many thousands of years ago. And I tried to get a job in the environmental business, and I couldn't find anything in Oklahoma because the oil field was busted at that time, and all the jobs in Oklahoma are either farming or oil field, well, ranching. So I moved to Huntington Beach, California, which was a great move for a single guy. I didn't know that at the time, but my first job, they put me in a cherry picker, and they hung me underneath the freeway. Where's my hand there? And I wipe sampled the underside of an overpass to check for lead residue from leaded gasoline, which had been banned years before. And guess what, Joe? There's lead in that shit. There's lead in that schmutz, right?
That's right.
So Los Angeles, you see, look at pictures of Los Angeles in the 30 years ago or whatever, and the air quality's terrible. The air quality's better now. It's still terrible. So the fact that we're finding lead in people's homes should not be a surprise to anyone. The fact that we're finding lead in soil should not be a surprise. So at some point, you have to draw a line in the sand. What's going to be acceptable and what's going to be not? What's going to warrant a response and what's not? We have PELs, and you might say, well, I don't want to hold an elderly woman to a PEL for a healthy worker who's going to be exposed 40 hours a week when this person's going to be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I totally get that. Normally, the rule of thumb is you divide the PEL by 10, right? So for asbestos, that's what it is, right? What's the permissible exposure limit? 0.1 fibers per cc over 8 hours. What is the clearance criteria? 0.01 fibers per cc over fibers per cc. So that's a rule of thumb. It's kind of an industrial hygiene rule of thumb, but there's TLVs, there's RELs, there's all kinds of things you can look to, but in many cases you don't know. But you've got to put a line in the sand somewhere, or you will clean until your fingers are bleed, and you're never going to get done. So to your other point, what's the clearance? We do a trauma scene. One of the things we like to do is watch the work be done. Rather than test, I like to watch the workers mix the concentrate of whatever disinfectant they're going to use. We check to make sure it's EPA registered. We make sure they mixed it according to the label. We watch them apply. We make sure it meets the dwell time. If they've cleaned, if we check to make sure they've cleaned, lifted the soil, sometimes I'll use an ultraviolet stamp to make sure they actually wiped the surface clean and not smeared it. So you use the rag, you wipe, then you fold in on itself, wipe, fold in on itself. We watch them do that. At the end of that process, my confidence is pretty high. They've done everything they can do. But some people still want additional testing. Some people say, I want more, right? Well, I don't think we should be making science fair projects out of every abatement. I think it's a waste of valuable resources. We just need to be more likely than not, or confident to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that the process that occurred met the objective. And if you think testing needs to be part of that, great. But for these wildfire, for example, to your question, nobody's doing on-site monitoring and nobody's doing clearances. I can't say nobody. It's very uncommon to see that. Could we do that? Of course. But is that a valuable use of the client's resources? I'm not sure. Now, if we found some hazardous material, perhaps that has a number that we can use, like lead, then yeah, we can use a surface criteria for lead. But for soot, ash, or char, there's not that criteria. So you could do post-testing to see if it's less than 1%. Is the number we've chosen is less than 1%. For soot, ash, or char. If it's above 1% soot, ash, or char, we, Clark Seif Clark, and again, I'm not pushing that opinion on anybody, we say you should do something about it. Well, could it be from the fact that they smoke and have a wood-burning stove and have incense and candles? Yeah, it could be, but it could also be from the fire. We don't have a baseline. So we always err on the side of safety and on the side of the resident or the occupant or the exposed, right? 1% is the number we chose. Why? It's the limit of quantification. It's the lowest number at which the lab can give us a repeatable data. That is very conservative. We already believe we're being ultra conservative, but because we don't have baselines for most of these homes, or then we prefer to be conservative.
And even if you did, they're going to be cleaner when they're done with that remediation than they were before it started. It would be
maybe.
Maybe. Well,
no, I think where the maybe is that, I think most restoration companies, believe that cleaning should be a multi-step process. There should be some dry steps, and then there should be some wet steps. And I think that, with work that's come out of the University of Colorado, proving the effectiveness of wet cleaning, and it surprised me in reducing fire-related VOCs. I was just very, very surprised, but they had data that demonstrated that wet cleaning after a fire was better than HEPA air scrubbers and all sorts of air cleaning devices and so on and so forth, just wet cleaning those surfaces. So I think that's where restoration companies are going to go. And one of the big things with restoration is if it still stinks when you're done, you're not going to get paid. Okay. Right. So, it has to be odor free. I think a lot of people are, would be confident in, with white glove clean. I think that it is also a reasonable expectation that the surfaces are white glove clean. And if there's a need to go beyond that, or a suspicion to go beyond that, certainly that can be done. But I think I'd like to get Derrick's kind of opinion on baselines and the effectiveness of not having baseline testing on, what's found in a normal house before the fire, because there's all sorts of stuff there. And I'd like to know maybe how you handle that, Derrick, in terms of, dealing with the client.
Well, I've asked various associations, groups, clients to let us do some baseline testing in major metros, and even rental car companies that have fentanyl in them, we're finding it. I'm like, look, you're calling us when you see a mysterious powder. That's when we get the call. But have you checked the cars that don't have a mysterious powder? Because the technology for looking for fentanyl is pretty good. Cars may be affected and just not visibly affected. So that white powder may be baby powder, but we may pick up fentanyl from 10 rides ago, right? So not having a baseline does make it, a little bit different. But I think the main thing when it comes to this, the whole picture of, you had talked about the effectiveness of cleaning, is source control. If you have a can of gasoline in your living room, I don't issue organic vapor filter respirators to people. I say, hey, get the can out of the living room, right? It's very common. I know you think that's crazy, but in Arizona, it gets really hot. And the garage gets really hot, and your gasoline evaporates. That's what people say. When I put it in the garage, it evaporates. I'm like, no, it evaporates in your closet in your living room as well, just not at the same rate. But source control is number one, right? This is fundamental. And so when it comes to things like soot, ash, and char, if you have deposition in a building that hasn't ever been cleaned, or the places that the restoration companies are going to clean, they're going to not only get the source, they're going to get 30 years of dust accumulation cleaned. That house is going to be cleaner than it's ever been. Okay, probably even post-construction, because you're going to get all the post-construction dust cleaned up too. Right. So source control is the most important thing. And I think, so when it comes to the baseline, not having a baseline, having a baseline, if we find something, we need to go get that something. We need to clean that surface. We need to get rid of the source. And again, these are not health-based. I mean, this is important. It's not health-based. The question we're being asked is, did that wildfire make deposits in my home that were not previously there that are related to that fire? And if it did, you're going to respond to that. This is not a health question in 99.9% of these cases. Okay, that might be an exaggeration. But in a high percentage of these cases, the question we're being asked is not, am I safe? It's, did that fire impact my house? And if it did, should it be cleaned?
Derek, I, in the notes for this, I noticed a term I was not familiar with. Ash is cash. Can you talk to us a little bit about the phrase "ash is cash"? What are you seeing out there? Are there people abusing this?
So this is my term. I mean, I think I coined this phrase. I'm pretty certain I did, but it's not that's not important. But uh, remember the term "mold is gold"?
Right.
Yes,
That's a
sir.
very negative term. That's a very negative term. That is not a positive term. Yes, you can make a living as a mold remediator, as a mold investigator, but to say mold is gold is pretty cavalier. That's pretty irresponsible. Ash is cash is the same thing. Right now, in Southern California, just to use the local recent example, Eaton Palisades fire, suddenly everybody's a wildfire expert. They're a wildfire residue testing expert. Now, I'm not saying there's not experts out there, but you know, I mean, I'm assuming in the next 30 days there's going to be wildfire testing LLC, wildfire smoke testing.com, all these companies are popping up because it's a money grab. It'll be a money grab. And a lot of this is about the money grab. And it makes me sad because, again, my motivation is to prevent people from being ill, from dying early, acute and chronic illness. If I can avoid it, great. But I see a lot of money grabbing. And I think that's to be expected. But ash is cash it should make you sad. It should make you upset. But that's the mentality people have. I haven't heard anybody say that except me, but that's what it reminds me of. The mold is gold. When I hear people say that, it makes me shudder because it's counter to the mission. Yes, you need to make a living doing your professional service, but you shouldn't be taking advantage of people.
Are you seeing many instances of just oversampling and spending far too much time and effort on sampling versus doing the remediation? Do you
Yeah,
get
what I'm
pulled into
seeing is
court
people.
over that? I mean, is that the kind of thing that people sue over?
Yeah. So I train firefighters on things like lithium battery fire response. Firefighters, they they step into horrific situations in terms of exposure. No one's going to argue that smoke is bad. I mean, if you're sitting around a campfire and the smoke's blowing in your face, you're going to move, or you're an idiot. But it's going to motivate you to move. Smoke is bad. And if you read what's in smoke, wildfire, structure fire, smoke, it's all terrible stuff. Methyl ethyl death. But that's not what persists. That's not what we need to be looking for after the fire is out, after the evacuation is lifted and people are returning to the homes. What we should be looking for are things that persist. I mean, you don't need to be looking for carbon monoxide in these homes, right? Now, okay, carbon monoxide kills people, right? It's also explosive. When lithium battery fires happen, it's, causes all kinds of problems. But and if you have carbon monoxide in the house and you're doing an IAQ study, yeah, you need to make a note of that. You've got some kind of exhaust flue problem or whatever. But what I'm talking about is after a wildfire, you don't need to be looking for carbon monoxide related to the wildfire. But I'm seeing people do basically the equivalent of that for all kinds of compounds that are not going to have persistence. And I think it's a waste of money. It confuses the client. There are groups with the power of the internet, there are groups of neighborhood groups. They're sharing results. They're picking and choosing. They're getting themselves worked up into a frothy frenzy, and it's really really sad. When really all they need to do is determine, is my house impacted or not? Should I clean it or not? Now, if you're the only house standing and there's 50 houses around you that are burned and you're going to be living in a construction zone, that's a different circumstance. But the question is your house cleanable? Is it impacted? Um,
And
and
how do we clean it?
how do we clean it, right?
All
So,
right. Hey, let's go to the roundup, Grayson. All right, the roundup's brought to us by Tramex, tramexmeters.com. Derek, I want to change the topic a little bit here, and then I want to give Cliff a chance for any final question he has. Um, in the notes, I have acknowledged restoration industry mental health as an undiscussed topic. I know you were just at the IAQA conference and you were impressed with at least one of the presenters that talked about that topic. Can you give us kind of the highlights?
I certainly can. So, in this business, we inject ourselves, as I said earlier, into chaos. We see things we cannot unsee. I've seen murder scenes, bloody handprints, unattended deaths, hoarding houses with, disabled pets. We hear things we cannot unhear, like the moan of a mother whose son just took his life with a shotgun. We smell things we cannot unsmell. If you've been to hoarding houses or unattended deaths, you know what I'm talking about. In fact, I bet right now everybody on this call is envisioning something horrific they have seen in this business. Now, we've been doing this for a long time, so obviously we're okay with it for whatever that's worth, right? But we don't acknowledge that every time you see something horrible, Hurricane Katrina, a tornado that rips up a family's home, people living in squalor, a meth lab where there's a baby's crib in the meth lab. I've seen these things. We pick up a feather. I'm going to use this analogy. We pick up a feather, we put it in our pocket. And then we go to the next job. We pick up another feather, we put that in our pocket. Do you know what weighs a ton? A ton of feathers. So I think that we need to be talking to our people about how are you with this job? I mean, you can't really interview an 18-year-old kid and say, hey, you're going to be sucking water and putting on fans most of the time. But every once in a while, you're going to see a dead guy or the outline of a dead guy, or you're going to, be on a suicide scene. No one would be in our business if they knew that.
Or even a
But I think
nasty
we need
sewage backup. I mean,
exactly.
I have, I have flashbacks to some of those that are just disgusting.
Right. You can't walk away untouched. And I just think, and this is not a cry for help, right? But I think so. Graham Dick at an RIA convention maybe 20 years ago, where I was presenting, he mentioned it briefly. He said, I'm seeing some things I'm not okay with, and then I never heard anything again. And then, for this IAQA convention, I called Sarah, the executive director. I said, Sarah, I want to bring you a keynote. I want to get up and talk to my peers about this issue. And so we found Dr. Trevor Wilkins. He's called the Angry Viking Therapist. He's got a long beard. He's tattooed. He's huge. He's a psychologist, for therapist for special operations groups, firefighters, and police. And he's kind of a rough around the edges. You would like him. You would like him. Everybody likes him. But he's not your typical, I'm wearing a shawl and going to listen to you cry and give you some breathing exercises. He's definitely a suck it up buttercup. You should feel sad when you see these things. It should disturb you. If it doesn't, you're a psychopath. So Dr. Trevor and I did the keynote at the IAQA convention this year on this topic. Now, what we wanted to do was raise awareness that this exists, let people know it's okay to not be okay with these things, and just say we need to continue the dialogue. We didn't have a solution. I don't have a solution, but do you think I'm off base? That's the question to the two of you. Do you think I'm off base with this?
No, I don't. But Cliff,
No, 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 not at all, not at all. And I think that most restoration. I mean, I can tell you, I experienced burnout on several different occasions, and the first time it took about 7 years, but at the end of the first 7 years, I was burnt out, and then I just needed to think about it and kind of change some things around and so on and so forth. No, I do think that it's important and very important, and maybe if you and perhaps what was his name, Dr. Wilkins, would be willing to come back
Trevor
and
Wilkins.
and do a program on IAQ Radio, I think it would be outstanding. And I think, if we could recruit you guys to do that, if you could get them, we would like to do that. But no, I think it's very, very important. And I was going to perhaps recommend that you kind of do that at RIA's next event, actually, next convention coming up. I'll put a word in if you guys would be willing to do it. Yeah, I think
we'd be happy to do that. I think I can't speak for Dr. Trevor, but yeah, it's important again to prevent people from dying early, and I don't want people walking away from a trauma scene and finding solace in a bottle or finding solace at the end of a barrel of a gun, right? So,
understood.
and again, and the burnout is one of the things that you just mentioned is something we don't talk about. After Hurricane Katrina, we had a team respond to Hurricane Katrina. Everyone did great work. I thought it was tough work. The conditions were tough because after we'd work all day, you would have to find food and water, and someone would have to drive 3 hours to find the nearest functional FedEx and to get samples off. But we had about 12 people leave the industry. And they left the industry because they're like, I don't want to be a part of this. Is like, I'm not good with this. And so basically we lost people who were well trained and could do good work and other things by putting them in a situation that, they couldn't tolerate. And so I think having a check-in process, because I work with a lot of firefighters, I work with a lot of police, and I work with special operations groups, and they have mechanisms in place, check-ins, they have tools, and we just don't acknowledge it at all. And I'm not saying we should do a whole lot, but we should at least acknowledge that, hey, this exists, and try to help those few people or those many people who are touched in an unhealthy way by these things. I mean, I can envision 40 different things right off the top of my head that are horrible that I have seen, and I can't talk to. I mean, I can talk to you, and I can talk to you and anybody on this call about these things. That's part of the healing process is talking about it, right? Well, working through it. But I can't talk to my daughter about this. How was your day at work? Oh, I saw a guy put a shotgun in his head, and I heard his mother crying over his dead body. I can't talk to most people about that. So I think it's important to say you should be talking about it to someone, anyone that's in the industry that's going to be able to have that shared experience and maybe give some guidance or just give a shoulder to, lean on for a second. And maybe that's all it takes is just, hey, Joe, let me put my hand on your shoulder for a second. Okay, I'm good. We're off to the races, right? But maybe I need more. I don't know. But we should just talk about it. And I think, I don't want that to make my life's mission. But again, my goal is to make people not die early, and suicide is dying early.
Cliff, I want to make sure you get a last question in here.
Yeah, I would. I would just like to know, you mentioned the word lithium a number of times, and I just would like to know, what would be the recommended remediation procedures, for a protocol for dealing with lithium, if there's anything out there, if you've written them, if you can direct us to one. And
So let's start with this. Lithium-ion batteries are all over the place. There's one on my phone. There's one on this computer. There's one on my wife's electric car. There's one on my RV. But you also have to recognize there are tractor trailers that are lithium-ion powered. There are buildings full of used lithium-ion batteries. I mean, warehouses packed with old EV batteries, old medical device batteries, drums and boxes and crates of these batteries. And there are buildings that are full of batteries that back up the city of Santiago, Chile, the city of Chandler, Arizona, McMicken. Make a note of that. McMicken, that's in Arizona. That's probably that's a world-renowned fire that occurred, and firefighters went up to that building, opened the door, and it blew guys up. Right? They lived, but they barely lived. So lithium-ion batteries are a thing that we need. The restoration industry really needs to start looking at what can we do to help. The indoor environmental professionals or IHs need to really start talking about what are we doing to help. And I'm going to give you an example, but there's many. So again, I've been to fires where there's 30,000 batteries in a building the size of a car battery to back up the city. When that catches on fire, it is a significant event. Lithium batteries emit hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen cyanide. Then once all those gases are gone, those are flammable and toxic generally. And then what's left is this black mass, nickel, manganese, cobalt. It's almost like copier toner. You know how if I say the word copier toner today, when you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you're going to have some black schmutz on your face. Right. It's that kind of fine powder. Right. There are electrical hazards, because these batteries when they catch on fire, they're 90% charged. It can kill you. When a fire department rolls up on a scene, if you're trapped in a electric vehicle, they actually have to get on a computer and look up what's called an emergency response guide, ERG, and decide where are the low voltage lines? Where are the high voltage lines? Because when they get the jaws of life or whatever the extrication tool they're going to use is, they don't want to die from electrocution trying to get you out of that car.
Hmm.
So that's something to consider. The electrical hazard no one talks about. The fire hazard issue is no one has taken an inventory of their lithium batteries. So you can't manage what you don't know. You know, colleges have scooters everywhere. How many do we have? How long are we going to let them be in service? You know, if you have a wheelchair and a person comes into your long-term care facility, do you have an inspection process for that wheelchair? I mean, mobility devices are amazing, right? They allow people who can't otherwise get around to get around. And these lithium batteries let them go really far and really fast in many cases. Probably not a good idea, but but if you're in a wheelchair, you're not really cared about the cord. So you're running over the cord, you're running over the box. And so when are you going to inspect that to make sure it doesn't catch on fire? Because I've seen footage of people burning to death in their beds who need their scooter, who need their wheelchair to leave, but that's what's on fire. And it's freaking horrible. So, but the other bigger things are things like the outlet. If you look at the wall, everybody look at the wall next to them, there's an outlet. How many amps is that outlet? 15, right? You guys are restoration guys. It could be 20, but it's probably 15 amps.
Yep.
How many electric bikes, how many electric scooters can you put on that before you overload the circuit and either burn the building side down, or because the power, the boxes associated with these, the electronics on these scooters or e-bikes or whatever are trying to charge and discharge, and they'll overcharge the battery and cause that device to catch on fire. And these things they're not like a fire like a lighter on a piece of paper. These are jettisoning, they jettison very high pressure streams of molten fire and a whole lot of gases, some that settle, some that rise. They're toxic, they're flammable, and no one's talking about that. But then there's the cleanup. And a lot of that has to do, right now I'm training firefighters. We're training firefighters on how to address these. Everyone has a different approach. Some bury them in sand, some put the car into water, some will spray 40,000 gallons of water on a vehicle. And then all that black mass I mentioned turns into a slurry, goes into the storm drain, goes into your local creek and into your local river, exacerbating the cleanup. So I like letting it burn where it sits. I also like not having chargers next to buildings or underneath a high-rise apartment, right? Why would you put, I mean, parking lots under living space is just a bad idea in general, but it's an ICE car, internal combustion engine, or a lithium-ion battery, right? Because there is a chance that's going to catch on fire. But if you're going to put chargers in your parking lot, number one, how many chargers can you put? How much more electricity can you demand from that transformer that serves your building? Some people are like, we're going to put 30 chargers. I'm like, well, you're going to have to dig up your whole parking lot, put in new infrastructure and new transformers just to bring that power in. And then why would you put chargers and electric vehicles right next to the hospital? Why don't you put it 30 feet out away from the building? That way, if it catches on fire, you know, it's still a hazard, but it's not jeopardizing the building and making you evacuate your hospital. So those are just a few of the things.
Does an typical ABC fire extinguisher work on a lithium fire?
No, you
What do
cannot
you have
put
to
out a
have?
lithium battery fire.
What do you have to have?
Let it burn. So you can take a whole lithium battery, stick it underwater, it will continue to burn. Number one, you can, even if you use water, what you'll do is you'll change it from an energetic fire. So instead of shooting fire out, it just looks like steam coming out, which is all those gases I mentioned earlier. You can't put them out in the traditional way. Now, a lithium battery in your mind is one thing, but actually, like in your drill, there's about 5 of these little, about this size, cells. And that's what makes up the drill for your Makita, your DeWalt, whatever. And a car like let's say a Tesla is 3,000 of these all welded together. So when this one catches on fire, goes into thermal runaway because it turns this one on fire and then catches the next one on fire. And so thermal runaway is one of the problems. But yeah, the fire department will go to these scenes, quote unquote, put out the car, and then this poor tow truck driver will pull the vehicle onto the flatbed and drive a block, and then his truck burns down. because not only does the lithium battery is pretty sensitive, but when you burn things like you burn the insulation. So you may have two wires that are like this, that when you start moving the car again, boop, you touch them, and now you reignite the fire. So we've been on a bunch of scenes around the world on lithium battery fires. It is a topic people need to get on their radar when it comes to building, because we're indoor air quality. Okay, so when it comes to buildings, inventory your batteries, understand where you're charging them, put together a end of life schedule and an inspection schedule, and make sure people understand the charging limitations. I think those are the pieces of advice I would give. You know how people have water management programs, asbestos management programs. We need lithium management programs. We need, a template, and we need people to understand that this is a risk. Lithium batteries aren't going away or anytime soon. Of course, if I was a rotary phone repairman, I guess I would be without a job. So eventually, all technology has a life trajectory, but yeah, it's something that you want. That if you're listening on this call, put it on your radar and call me if you have questions. I'm on several committees, and when it comes to cleaning these things up, Cliff, to your first question, it's a 40-hour HAZWOP or hazmat type of cleanup.
Right.
This is not throw on a half-face respirator and go do it. We've done, how do you know what respirator you need? Well, you do personal monitoring. So we have done personal monitoring on large and small fires, and I'm telling you, it's SCBA during the fire only. You better be carrying your own air, and it's PAPR when you're doing a cleanup. And that's based on the kinds of compounds.
We've got to get you back. I wish we had more time. I got a text here. What about other battery chemistry hazards?
Well, there's lead acid batteries, right? So those are very common. And lead acid has acid. And so when those batteries overheat, they swell up. And when they pop, man, you better have an emergency shower nearby. You get a little acid on you, you wash it off, you're fine. But you leave it on you for a minute, you're going to have problems. So lead acid batteries are an issue. Plus you have lead. And a lot of times these lithium-ion battery banks, like in a server room, may have battery backups. You'll have a combo pack. You'll have lead acid batteries and lithium batteries. And when the room burns up because of one or the other, you have the hazards of both. And that's another key point. We have to tell people that if you're a mold guy or an asbestos guy, you have to recognize there are other hazards that are commingled in these projects. And you need to do a job hazard analysis on every job, right? I mean, for us, heat stress is the number one killer. We had people come from all over the world to look at a lithium battery fire. And I said, I wrote the job hazard analysis. Number one was heat stress. And they go, no, we know it's hot in Phoenix. I go, no, you don't know it's hot in Phoenix. You're going to be wearing an arc flash suit because of electrocution issues instead of your standard Tyvek. You're going to be wearing rubber boots with steel toes because these battery racks could fall and land on your toe. Hard hat, PAPR, arc flash gloves. And you're going to go into a building that has not had air conditioning for weeks. It's 113 in the building. We know this because we have devices with telemetry giving us that measurement. I said, we're going to start at 5 a.m. and you're in for an hour and out for 30 minutes. And they said, no, we start at 8, these attorneys. I go, okay, we can start at 8, but you're still an hour in and 30 minutes out. We're never going to get done with this job. Well, the first group, they drew straws because each group had its own little group of investigators because they're going to want to point fingers. Whose fault is it? First group was a group of Koreans, and they were all overweight. This is not a dig on Koreans in general. This particular group were all overweight, smokers, and they started putting on the PPE. We had a decon set up, and we had decon attendants helping them get us suited up. And they had been through the class. They got fit tested. We made sure everything was legit there. Their eyes got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when they went in that building, in 15 minutes, they came out and they said, we can't do this. I said, yes, thank you very much. It's freaking hot in Phoenix when you're wearing PPE. That's why we have a paramedic on site. That's why we have an ice bath where you can stick your arms in the ice bath when you come out. So anyway,
very interesting.
I love to talk. I hope, Joe, Cliff, I hope this was a valuable use of time for somebody.
Hey, I just want to also mention your sewer gas solutions. big problem for a lot of people. And you've invented a product that you can pour down into that drain, and it won't evaporate in these hot days in Phoenix.
Yeah. So I got tired of people calling me at 3 in the morning to go to a hospital that was evacuated for a natural gas leak. And I would show up, and after doing all the due diligence, I would take a flashlight and some smoke, and I would smoke this floor drain, and air's coming into the building. Then I took a cup of water, poured it in, and smoked it again, and the smoke just hovered. And I thought, some of those patients that are on ventilators in that parking lot are going to have a negative outcome because of this. There's got to be a better way. Old school way was the janitor would pour water down the floor drain. So we started looking at mechanical solutions, and 15 years of R&D, we came up with a pourable product that you can put in any toilet, sink, floor drain, whatever, and it won't let the trap evaporate for a year. It creates an evaporation barrier, and it works at all normal earth temperatures. You know, you can put it in a freezer, you can use it in the summer in Phoenix. But yeah, it's a simple solution, or an elegant solution to a very common problem, especially with COVID or schools out for the summer. Places, you don't need the product on plumbing you're using, you need it in the plumbing you're not using. And what most people don't know about sewer gas is highly corrosive. And so if you have a dry mop sink in a closet where you have your fire panel, it will corrode your fire panel. It will corrode your cooling coils and cause them to rupture and leak out the refrigerant. It will actually corrode your water pipes and cause them to break. Sewer gas contains a whole hodgepodge of compounds, but they're all very strong oxidizers, and so they will damage things significantly over
What's
time.
the website where we can get the sewer
more
gas
information?
solution?
Yeah, so www.sewergassolutions.com.
All right, Derrick. Before we go, anything we missed that you'd like to add? I know we could probably talk for another hour, but I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure there weren't any key points we missed.
Well, the key point is I want to thank you two for your contributions to this field. I want to thank the people on this call. I see, Don, I see Franco, I see Joe Spurgeon. There's others, but you know, it, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. I'm glad to be standing shoulder to shoulder with you on the easy stuff, and I'm glad to be standing shoulder to shoulder with you guys on the hard stuff.
Well, thank you, Derrick. I appreciate that, and we appreciate having you join us. Cliff, any final thoughts before we go?
Nope. I just want to thank you for joining us, and we'll talk soon.
All right. This is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks to this week's guest, Derrick Denis. Thank you, Derrick, so much. The Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, our engineer, Grayson, Gone Fishing, Fisher, our sponsors, our loyal audience, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with RIA President and ATI President and Chief Acquisition Officer, Jeff Moore. Come back and join us live then. In the meantime, check out some past shows on IAQradio.com.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.